After years of hiding unit sales data for the Xbox One, in 2022, Microsoft finally decided to release official sales numbers for the console, and they were rather disappointing. Throughout the Xbox One's lifetime, Microsoft was only able to sell a total of 58 million consoles, which in isolation is a great number. But in comparison to the competition and the Xbox's own predecessors, the number is rather underwhelming. For perspective, the PS4, which had an identical lifespan, was able to sell exactly double the units at 117 million. Even the PS5, which released just 3 years ago, is at 46.6 million units and is on track to overtake the Xbox One in terms of sales. The Xbox Series X/S was supposed to be the console that finally turned around this trend for Microsoft, but it seems like the disparity is only getting worse. In fact, looking at global monthly sales, it appears that the Xbox is already starting to lose steam while the PS5 is actually gaining steam. Now, it's true that Nintendo has had consoles that have flopped way harder, like the Wii U, which barely sold at 13 million units. But there's a major difference between a Nintendo console flopping and a Microsoft console flopping. You see, 57% of Nintendo's total earnings come from hardware sales, meaning that they are very much capable of selling a niche console and still coming out on top financially. The same, however, cannot be said about Microsoft, who sells the Xbox for a loss. And this isn't speculation either. Microsoft's gaming CEO Phil Spencer has admitted that every single Xbox Series X/S console is sold for a loss of up to $200. Since then, Microsoft has hiked the price of the Series X in certain regions by less than $100. But even assuming that Microsoft only loses $100 per console on average, the Xbox Series X and S have already lost the company over $2 billion. And it hasn't gained Microsoft any market share or notoriety over the PlayStation or even the Switch. It doesn't seem like Microsoft is willing to give up though, as they're throwing one last Hail Mary with their $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. But will this acquisition actually turn things around for Xbox, or has Microsoft just dug themselves into a $69 billion deeper hole? To understand why the modern Xbox is struggling, we have to first understand how the Xbox grew in popularity in the first place. And that takes us all the way back to March 2nd, 1999, the day that the PlayStation 2 was announced. If you didn't know, the PlayStation 2 would go on to be the best-selling console of all time, selling over 155 million units. Hearing this, a lot of you are probably inclined to think that the Xbox was an offensive move from Microsoft. They saw how successful the PS2 was and they wanted a piece of the pie, but that's actually not how things played out. It turns out that the Xbox was actually more of a defensive move. You see, the PS2 wasn't just a gaming console, it was actually more of a multimedia device, something that Sony has only built on over the years. It could play CDs and DVDs, and Microsoft began to fear that this would allow Sony to eat into their personal computer market share. So Microsoft decided to flex on Sony by showcasing their own multimedia technology suite, DirectX. DirectX is basically the middleman in Windows machines that interprets code and translates it into graphics and sound. DirectX was not only robust and reliable, but it was familiar to developers because, given that it was from Microsoft, it worked seamlessly with Windows 2000. So Microsoft decided to just port Windows 2000 and DirectX into a dedicated gaming console called the DirectXbox, or Xbox for short. And the pitch for developers was that developing games for the Xbox would be similar to developing PC games, and the pitch worked. Alongside the launch of the original Xbox on November 15, 2001, we would see the launch of a legendary gaming series, Halo. And this brings us into the first factor that made Xbox so successful: iconic exclusive games. Naturally, a lot of gamers hate exclusive games because it forces them to buy multiple consoles just to play all of the best games on the market. But from a corporate perspective, exclusive games are critical when it comes to building a loyal fan base and boosting sales. Microsoft understood this perfectly, as the Xbox was initially defined by a slew of exclusive games and series, like Halo, Forza, The Witcher, Left 4 Dead, Call of Duty 2, Elder Scrolls 3, and Doom 3, just to name a few. But over the years, this list has gotten smaller and smaller to the point that Xbox Series X and S exclusives can be counted on one hand. It's basically just Forza Horizon 5, Halo Infinite, Starfield, and Microsoft Flight Simulator. I suspect that most simulator fans would prefer to play Microsoft Flight Simulator on a PC. So the Xbox really only has Forza Horizon 5, Halo Infinite, and Starfield going for it. When you look at the games that are exclusive to or optimized for the PS5 on the other hand, you have all of these. Considering this, it's no wonder why the PlayStation and the Switch have been crushing the Xbox. Both of them have a bunch of exclusive titles that make the console worth owning, unlike the Xbox. But how did Microsoft even end up in this situation? Wasn't the Xbox supposed to be the easiest console to develop for because of its similarities with Windows? Well, it turns out that that by itself was not enough. One of the biggest factors holding back developers from preferring the Xbox over the PlayStation is its discrepancy in performance. The PlayStation has historically always been more powerful than the Xbox, but this extra power also came with a higher price tag. The Xbox 360, for example, launched at $400, while the PS3 launched at $500 to $600. Adjusting for inflation, the PS3 cost as much as $880. So the Xbox was able to reach a demographic that the PlayStation may have never reached, making it worth it to develop Xbox games. But over the years, Sony has slightly pulled back their prices while Microsoft has slightly pushed up their prices, such that the PlayStation and Xbox are pretty much identically priced. But while the price of the consoles are the same cannot be said about their performance. The PS4 was objectively more powerful than the Xbox, in fact as much as 40% more powerful. This disparity has only been exacerbated by the new generation of consoles, because Microsoft has gone out of their way to launch a lower-end Xbox called the Series S, which game developers aren't exactly a fan of. They're basically having to nerf their games and the graphics to accommodate for the Series S. In fact, some games have even been delayed because developers have had a tough time nerfing performance for the Series S without sacrificing performance for the Series X. This is rather annoying even as a secondary release, so I think you can see why developers are hesitant to bet on an exclusive flagship on the Xbox. But the whole rivalry between the PlayStation and the Xbox only tells half the story, because there's very much a dark horse at play: PC gaming. Remember how one of the biggest advantages of the Xbox originally was its similarities to PC? It was easy to port games from PC to Xbox and vice versa. Well, this has actually turned into a massive disadvantage, because now there is no such thing as a true Xbox exclusive. Basically, every Xbox exclusive is also available on PC. This wasn't a big deal back in the 2000s and early 2010s, because only the super nerds with massive budgets gamed on PC. But ever since the launch of AMD Ryzen, building PCs has become a lot more budget-friendly and popular. This trend has only been accelerated by the explosion of esports, which has made PC gaming cooler than ever. What does this all mean, you ask? Well, if you really want to play Microsoft exclusive games, it often just makes more sense to get a PC. The PC can not only run the games much better, but it can also do a lot more than just gaming. If all of that wasn't bad enough, the Xbox has been facing another major obstacle as well, which is the larger interests of Microsoft. Since the launch of the original Xbox, Microsoft has grown from a few $100 billion company to a few $1 trillion company. And considering that prosecutors wanted to break up Microsoft back when they were just a few $100 billion company, Microsoft is now a larger target than ever. So the last thing they want to do is show off monopolistic tendencies by launching a bunch of exclusive games just to win over the gaming market. In fact, Satya Nadella has gone on record stating that he wants to end Xbox exclusives and that the ball is now in Sony's court. But if that's the case, why in the world did Microsoft complete their biggest acquisition of all time and spend $69 billion to buy Activision Blizzard? From a general sense, it's obvious why Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard. It's obviously to control a larger portion of the gaming market and make more money. But if we take a closer look at the acquisition and see how Microsoft executives talk about it, we'll see that the acquisition is less of an expansion play and more of a pivot play. And we can take it from the horse's mouth itself, the CEO of Microsoft Gaming, Phil Spencer. When asked about the reasoning behind the Activision Blizzard acquisition, Phil said, quote, The biggest gaming platform on the planet is mobile phones. 1.5 billion people play on mobile phones. We really started the discussions, internally at least, on Activision Blizzard around the capability they had on mobile and then PC with Blizzard. Those are the two things that were really driving our interest. In other words, Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard to dominate the mobile and the PC space, not the console space. This might be a bit confusing given that a lot of us see Activision as the OG console game maker, but it turns out that they have evolved quite a bit over the years. In fact, 43% of their revenue comes from mobile gaming, which is the company's top performer, largely due to mobile hits like Call of Duty Warzone Mobile. In fact, console gaming is now their worst performing division, only accounting for a quarter of their revenue. Microsoft isn't too concerned about this though, because they're looking to branch out beyond consoles because, well, the Xbox isn't even doing all that well, and there's a massive gaming market beyond that. Would Microsoft actually put so much history behind them and completely pivot their gaming strategy though? Well, if Satya Nadella has one superpower, it's not letting ego cloud his business judgment. If it's better to run servers on Linux than Windows, he'll do it. If it's better to expand Office to iOS devices and put down the Windows Phone, he'll do it. If it's better to kill Internet Explorer and develop a new Edge that runs on Google Chromium, well, he'll do it. So, considering his track record, I don't think he'll hesitate to make a similar decision with the gaming industry. If the Xbox simply isn't cutting it and mobile and PC gaming are working out a lot better, he'll shift Microsoft's focus to mobile and PC gaming. And it seems that this is already starting to happen. The next Xbox is envisioned to be less of a traditional gaming console that competes directly with the PlayStation and be more of a hybrid cloud gaming platform. What that exactly means is not clear, but one thing is for sure, Microsoft is not afraid to experiment and take risks with the Xbox. That's arguably why they launched two different consoles, the Series X and S in the first place. They understood that their old approach simply wasn't working, so they wanted to try something new. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this new strategy worked out either, and who knows how the cloud-based console will play out. So the glory days of Xbox may very well be behind us, but don't count out Microsoft just yet. While they may not be the king of console gaming, they may very well become the king of the gaming industry at large. With historically high interest rates, the appeal of bills and bonds is higher than ever, yet traditional brokerages haven't really adapted with the times. They still expect people to use clunky bond tables, scroll through long overwhelming lists, and even use virtual keyboards till recently. And that's why we created our own modern bond platform, Silo. At Silo, we prioritize the user experience and the ease of finding and investing in the issuers you know and trust, so that you too can easily lock in high yields. Also, choosing a strong user experience does not mean sacrificing on safety. Every Silo account is insured by $500,000 in SIPC insurance and $2.5 million in FDIC insurance. Also, all funds deposited on the platform will be maintained by our trusted custodian, Interactive Brokers, who has experience managing $373 billion worth of assets over the past 45 years. So, if you're looking for a modern way to invest in bonds, please consider checking out Silo in the description below. Unlike Microsoft, Sony is killing it with the PS5, but the problem for Sony is that that's the only place they're killing it. Check out this video to learn more, but until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.